wet, just a light touch, you're just going to get the clay wet. Release, get both hands wet again. Since we're at such different stages of our work, being, you know, fresh off the wheel, bone dry, in the bisque, some in the glaze kiln, does anybody want to talk about any of their pieces right now? Is there anything you want to talk about or have questions about, or do you want to just... It's not about strength, it's all about speed, pressure, and water. Just in, set off that thumb over the top, and I bring both hands up. And off the piece. Get them wet. Always get them wet after every movement. Once the clay starts to become tacky or sticky or dry out, you need to release the pressure, get your hands wet, come back to it. Because if you don't, the clay is going to stick, tear off, knock off center, all of those. So as soon as it gets tacky, release the pressure. And don't stop your wheel and then do this, because it automatically knocks your piece off center. And don't touch your piece before it's moving. Again, you're going to make it look too forced, too manipulated, too chewy.
I think that's enough.
That should probably be enough for right now. And whoever comes in. You guys like the Beatles? Who doesn't
like it all.
Alright, cool. Duplicates of things when you want to do things exactly the same size. And I think it's a good practice to weigh out your clay initially, because let's say you threw a mug and it was the perfect size mug and you're like, whoa, I don't know how much clay that was. So the next time you grab clay, it might be too much clay or it might not be enough clay. So you're sort of guesstimating. When I work on my pieces, I can guesstimate, I can look at a form and I can say, well, that's probably going to be about 10 pounds of clay. And then I'll throw the form in. I might be off by a pound or two, but it gives you a general idea of how big things are. If you want to throw a bowl and you grab 6 pounds of clay, you're not going to have a bowl about this big. You're going to have a bowl about this big, because you think you're hollowing the clay. So prepping our clay, we're just going to go through the very basic intro techniques of wheel throwing, and the pieces are going to collapse and die relatively soon and quickly. So you're going to try a technique, the clay will be too stressed out, too waterlogged, and it might have air pockets in it. So when you're trying these techniques and they fail, you can just rip the clay off, clean your hands, grab a fresh piece of clay, start right where you left off. It's kind of like an algebra equation. Everything builds off of itself. You learn the first part, you get that down, take that off, you try a new piece, you go back to what you just learned, and then you try something new. And then you take that off. You grab the wheel is tricky, it's totally frustrating. What we got to do is just take it slow, break the steps down. I'm going to show you where we're going to go from A to Z, and you're going to backtrack and you're going to do maybe A, B, and C. So just try not to make things up. Try to stick to the techniques that we're going to learn. So you want to start with a round ball of clay because you want the clay to be as close to already formed as possible. You don't want to sit there and spend your time getting your clay is bagged up for a while. Air can sometimes get in. And we don't only wedge to get rid of air pockets, but we wedge to align the particles to get ready to throw on the wheel, and we also wedge to homogenize the clay. There might be some drier areas of the clay in the bag towards the top as opposed to towards the middle. So if you wedge it, you're conditioning it, and you're essentially kneading it, and you're getting the air pockets out. So you don't have to spend a long time on this, but that's pretty good. Let me get you some more plastic because it's going to respond really well in your hands. If the clay is too soft, it might respond too quickly, or it might not hold its shape as well when we start to form it. Then you're going to either have to walk away from it, or you're going to have to dry it a little bit. Which is what we're going to do initially on the wheel. And then we continue to try to open it. And you know, as we turn the piece in our hand, it's very similar to the wheel turning. And as we pinch, what we're trying to do is move the clay from the bottom up. Same principle on the wheel. And we pinch by having a finger on the inside and a finger on the outside. Exact same hand techniques or principle as throwing on the wheel. You have a hand on the inside, a hand on the outside. You squeeze it, the clay has nowhere to go but up as it's turning around. Unlike the wheel, we don't use any water with the pinch pots, even though you could. So the principle is, you always stabilize the clay. Hand on the inside, hand on the outside, squeezing it, the clay moves up. As you're turning it around, and you're pinching to try to get a uniform, even wall thickness. You want to try to utilize the amount of clay that you have. If your piece is too thick, then there's no sense to throw with the amount of clay that you threw with. If you don't have enough clay, then you're not able to get your form. You can see how it holds its form. And each time you get a general wall thickness. Then you go back in, you pinch the clay a little bit more, you push more clay up. Next time you push more clay up. Same thing as turning the piece here and pinching, you're thinning the walls up. This is a natural sponge. They also call it an elephant ear sponge, probably because it's shaped like an elephant's ear. This, believe it or not, will actually hold more water and release it nice and consistently, where this gets kind of beat up and old, and the minute you touch it, it whoosh, gushes water. Both work pretty good. The natural sponge works the best. Here is a few different types of the ribs and shaping tools we have. Not limited just to these, but these are the wooden ribs. I like to start with these because they give you a general shape first. You don't want to shape too quickly because the form will get away from you. The rubber ribs are good. Some people prefer these over the wooden ones. I like to use the ribs at different stages of the throwing process because, as you know, ceramics is all about timing. When the clay is first wet, I like to use the wooden, and then I like to move to the metal rib. It makes it nice and clean. This is tricky though because it's so thin and it's easy to gouge, stick to the clay. This is tricky, but you can get some beautiful results with this. Now the rubber ones come in different consistencies. This is a harder type of plastic, even harder. This is almost like jelly, and this is super soft. Now the ribs can sometimes stick to the piece, but that's why they're beveled, so they slide over the piece. We won't get into that until at least, well, maybe next class, but it's going to take a while to learn these techniques. And you have these in your packet. They're knurled because your hands are wet and slippery with the liquid clay, so they're textured so that you can grab them easy. Now we're going to use this to check the base of our clay, to trim off the top of it, to do a lot of different techniques that are just inherent to throwing. Here are some trimming tools. This is called a loop tool. This is a smaller one. These are just blades on a wooden handle. A bigger one, this is a fettling knife. This is good for hand building and different techniques along those lines. This is a larger loop tool or a trimming tool, and when we throw a piece, we dry it to about half dry, which is leather hard, which is at a perfect stage to attach a handle, but we invert the piece, secure it onto the wheel head after we've centered it, and we trim off the excess clay on the bottom, and we shape it a little bit with these. So it lightens the piece, it also gives it more of a sculptural quality. This is towards the end of the process, so it'll be a while before we get into trimming. So initially, take a sponge. You want a bucket of water, you want to fill it up to at least 2/3 of the way. A lot of people will start with too little water, and they only get their fingertips wet. Water moves the clay, so you really want to get your hands wet. I would avoid getting water on your sponge and squishing it all over your piece. It just saturates the piece and stresses it out way too much. Let the water on your hands do the work. And if you get your hands wet all the way up and past your wrist, it'll run down your hand, keeping them lubricated longer. So make sure you have enough water. Some people like to throw with slurry or liquid clay in their water. I like to throw with fresh water because I don't think it sticks as much. So if you're throwing a lot and you find there's a lot of liquid clay down here, you might want to change your water. I do. It's all personal preference. This is a removable wheel head. There's holes in it because on the wheel head over here, this is an aluminum wheel head. These are called bat pins. These do come out. I like to throw right on the wheel head because these lines serve a few different purposes. One, they lock the clay onto the wheel. Plus, when you're trying to trim, you want to center the piece, and it gives you a visual. However, it's also nice to be able to, if you have a wet, thin piece, it's nice to be able to throw your piece and not spend the next half an hour drying it with a hair dryer or letting it go slowly as it dries. Wheels, there's kick wheels, and there's a lot of different electric wheels. This brand is a Brent, and this is probably one of the best wheels. If you buy a wheel like this, it's going to last you 25, 30 years if you take care of it. Getting all over you. The splash pans have these little wings. If your pan is already on the wheel, stand in front of the wheel like this, put your thumbs on the flaps, and push down and away from yourself. And that back comes off. Grab this one, wiggle it back and forth towards yourself, and it slides right out. Then you can dump the liquid clay out, and you can clean it easier. The corner of the wheel there, and you want it slightly off to the right, because all the work is going to be happening from the right of. So, take your ball of clay, you grab it, and you try to just throw it as close to on center as possible. Some people will just take a dab of water and put it there. I generally don't, but a lot of things are preference, superstition, whatever.
Yeah, what's that one drop of water?
It might just be enough just to lock it on, but I think, I don't think you need it. Some people do, but that's not how I throw. However, and I can show you certain techniques, but really it's going to depend on your body makeup, the size of your hands. Start with your ball of clay, dry hands, take it. You don't have to start way up here, just want to try to throw it as close to on center. See, that's totally stuck. So, you get both hands wet. Before you touch the clay or release off of the clay, you always want your wheel going. So, get your hands wet, just a light touch, you're just going to get the clay wet. Release your left hand, break your wrist for strength. If you're like this, sometimes the clay can toss your hands around, but if you break your wrist, bend it, there's a lot more power that way. Take your left elbow, try to lock it onto your leg and close to your body. Take your right hand. Your right hand is going to go over your left thumb. Roll your right palm down and just sort of lean forward, and that locks it onto the wheel head. Then release the pressure and take your hands away. Now that's nice and locked on. Now it's not on center, but it's locked onto the wheel head. Get both hands wet again. And now what we're going to try to do is what's called coning up. We're going to force the clay together into like a tower or a long narrow cylinder of solid clay. And then we're going to bring it back down. The reason for that is it homogenizes the clay again, very similar to wedging. It forces them. They have chemical water, which they're like this right now. And then once you start to wedge them, they all get going the same way. And you want them lined up so that when you throw, they're already conditioned to slide over each other. The first stages this is where all the power comes from. When you do the break, that's the last time you use that much force. So when we center, we're using the most amount of wheel speed, pressure, and if you keep your left one stabilized, locked onto your leg, and you bend your wrist, you can essentially center this clay with one hand. Your right hand is there to sort of smooth out the backside and keep everything happening. If your arms are up and away like this, the clay has a tendency to toss you around. The clay will only do what you tell it to. So get your wheel going at a moderate to fast speed. If your wheel feels like it's too out of control, it probably is. A lot of times people will turn the wheel on and then they'll take their foot away. I always fluctuate my wheel speed throughout the whole throwing process. This is way too slow. I might need to speed it up, but halfway through the process I might need to slow it down. So I always keep my foot on the pedal. And some of these pedals are kind of old too, so they'll slowly start to drop and then your wheel spins out of control. So get used to the wheel, the pedal. So now we're going to cone this up and I'm going to bring it down. Wheel going at a moderate to fast speed, left elbow locked onto my left leg, bend my wrist, drop my hand here. First I'm going to show you how you can center with one hand. See how it pulls away from my finger? Visually you can tell this is off center. If you put your hands here, it goes the thump, the thump, the thump. You can tell it's not on center. Bend your wrist, get your wheel going, lock this arm in, drop your left thumb over the top. I'm going to press towards 1 o'clock gently, and as long as this hand is wet, it can stay there all day.